Okay, thank you again for the invitation to be here. I have something to share with you today. The title that we have is, Did Joseph of Egypt Interact with the Jaredites? And what I want you to understand is that in this presentation, I'm not going to give you proofs. Here's how it happened. I was doing research on the snakes, the serpents, and it led to a whole lot of other things. And it was other things I couldn't deny. Things were starting to fall into place. And so what I'm sharing with you today is my research and how I see it, the way it laid out. And to me, there's a whole lot of questions that become apparent and requires more research. So this is the culmination of research. It's a theory that I've come up with. The books that I put up here on this are books that I reference in the presentation. So if you're interested in some of this material and the information, come up afterwards with your phone and take a picture, and you can start doing your own research. I think that that's what we need to do, is have multiple people looking at this material and coming up with insights that they're finding in the process. So, we'll begin. The Book of Mormon provides us with a thin history of the Jaredites as recounted by Ether and translated by Moroni. It is mostly a list of kings with what we can only assume are events that become key turning points in their cultural history. While there are 6 chapters in Ether, when we break down the information provided, nearly 1/5 of the dialogue is Moroni editorializing on the subject matter or expounding on the gospel. And the point I'm making with that is that we have brief chapters to begin with, and they're covering 1,800 years of history. We're not getting details. All we're getting are just little pieces, okay? If the Book of Mormon is a history of the Nephites, then why did Mormon direct Moroni to translate and include the Jaredite plates? It appears that part of the reason is to provide a larger cultural context to historical events in the Americas. One of the points being, without the Jaredite record, it would be difficult to identify the geography and cultures of the Book of Mormon. Because we have the Jaredite record, we can comprehend the distinctions between the Nephite and the Jaredite cultures because we have extensive evidences of the Olmec and the Maya. So because of the information that we can glean out of from Ether, the Jaredites and who they were, where they were located, the land of desolation, and so on, we have geographic clues and we have cultural clues. And it helps us make the distinctions, so much so that I believe there's nowhere else in the Americas that you can overlay the Book of Mormon story in the geography and it work the way it works in Mesoamerica, with the narrow neck of land being the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. It also appears that another reason for the record is to provide clues to historical events they did not have room to write about in their record. Perhaps the Americas factor into biblical history in a manner that we had never before imagined. Now, here are some facts to consider. First, the Book of Mormon tells of 3 migrations from the Middle East to the New World, and all 3 were accomplished through oceanic sea travel. It appears that 2 of them were over the Pacific Ocean, and the other over the Atlantic. Second, all 3 migrations were a result of people fleeing from major cultural upheavals to a land that God had provided for the migrants. Considering the facts just presented, several questions arise that may provide potential clues for our investigation. Number 1, was ancient oceanic seafaring much more common than we assume? Number 2, did Moroni provide the Jaredite information for both spiritual and historical reasons? Number 3, does that historical information tie the Americas directly to Joseph? Not in the text of the Book of Mormon, but it may through other research and through other pieces of information we can find. While the Book of Mormon hints to a Joseph connection, there is nothing written that outright explains the details. Lehi lets us know he is a descendant of Joseph, and that clue plays a very important role in the storyline when the Nephites merge with the Mulekites. And the reason I say that is the Book of Mormon does not give us specifically what the lineage was of, let's put it this way. It says Mosiah came down out of the city of Nephi, and then he was just appointed king. Well, now how does that happen? They had 300 years of clearly defined royal lineage from the son of Zedekiah, Mulek, down through until Zarahemla. How does that happen that he just gives up the throne to this newcomer? What the archaeology tells us is Mosiah marries the daughter of Zarahemla. And what that means is you have the tribe of Joseph and the tribe of Judah who are now married and creating the unified throne of Israel here in the United States. Joseph being the head of the northern kingdom of Israel, and then Judah having the right to the throne to rule over Israel. But even more curious is the writing of the Jaredite prophet Ether, who makes specific mention on how this land is an inheritance to Joseph. The following passage is the editor Moroni speaking on what Ether knew and then blending it with his Nephite history. So this comes out of the 6th chapter of Ether. Behold, Ether saw the days of Christ, and he spake concerning a new Jerusalem upon this land. And he spake also concerning the house of Israel, and the Jerusalem from whence Lehi should come. After it should be destroyed, it should be built up again, a holy city unto the Lord. Wherefore it, the old Jerusalem, could not be a new Jerusalem, for it had been in a time of old. But it should be built up again, and become a holy city unto the Lord, and it should be built up unto the house of Israel. And that a new Jerusalem should be built up upon this land, unto the remnant of the seed of Joseph. For which things there has been a type, for as Joseph brought his father down into the land of Egypt, even so he died there. Wherefore the Lord brought a remnant of the seed of Joseph out of the land of Jerusalem, that he might be merciful unto the seed of Joseph, that they should perish not, even as he was merciful unto the father of Joseph, that he should perish not. Wherefore the remnant of the house of Joseph shall be built up upon this land, and it shall be a land of their inheritance. And they shall build up a holy city unto the Lord, like unto the Jerusalem of old, and they shall no more be confounded until the end come, when the earth shall pass away. So the question is, why did God make this inheritance covenant with Joseph? How was Ether made aware of this covenant between God and Joseph? Is there more to the story? Obviously, that's a leading question. Can it be discovered through the hints we are given? So, we're going to do some investigation. I'm going to share with you how I came upon this. This investigation requires a timeline to help us understand the chronology of the ancient events in the Near East, where Joseph is located, then placed next to the scant hints found in the Jaredite record. First, there's a whole lot of different timelines coming out of the Near East with the pharaohs and so on. The timeline I employ is the one proposed by David Roll. This Egyptian chronology is the one used by Timothy Mahoney in his film, Patterns of Evidence, Exodus. I have a copy of that over here if you want to take a look at that and get that for yourself. It's a DVD that's out there. This particular chronology places Joseph of Egypt at about 1670 BC and the Exodus at 1447. This chronology also eliminates the 150-year Mediterranean Dark Age. And what I mean by that is those who are faithful to the 400 years in bondage have to extend out the pharaohs much farther into the past. And they have to extend Abraham to about 2000 BC. And when they do that, it creates what they call a Mediterranean Dark Age, because there's a blank spot in the ancient Greek history. There's a blank spot in the Hittite history. There's a blank spot in Babylonian history. What David Rohl says is, let's get rid of these blank spots. Let's collapse all these histories down. And what we find is, what he did, he shows the Exodus taking place in 1447, and he shows Abraham coming into Egypt in 1853 BC. So from the time Abraham comes into Egypt until the Exodus is 400 years. David is saying, let's not worry about 400 years in bondage. The Hebrew are here in Egypt 400 years. It puts Joseph right here about 1670, 1650 BC. And that means they're in bondage about 225 to 250 years. It's still a substantial amount of time, but it's not the 400 that traditionally has been taken as what needs to be factored into the timeline. So what happened is that when I placed the Jaredite king list against Rohl's new chronology, we find that Joseph of Egypt is contemporary with Jaredite king Emer. What I did was I created a spreadsheet, and I started at Usher's date for the Tower of Babel at 2200 BC. And using that time frame, we've got Abraham in Egypt in 1853, and then Joseph at 1670. But then the Book of Mormon Kings, we start here and come down. The interesting part is, in the Book of Mormon Kings, the history is so thin, very few times are we actually given an amount, a time frame of when a particular king reigned. Emer is one of them we do have a time frame. But most of them is just a genealogy. So-and-so is the son of, who's the son of, who's the son of, who's the descendant of, a descendant of could be a son of, a grandson, a great-grandson. We don't know the time frame that we're losing there. But what I found was, going about 60 years in each of those reigns, we come down to where Emer is pretty much contemporary with Joseph of Egypt. But the first thing to notice is that on this timeline is that the Jaredite oceanic crossing takes place shortly after the 2200 BC. So the question arises, was oceanic sea travel possible at this time? Are there evidences that oceanic crossings were taking place in the 3rd millennium BC? I started researching this. I went out and I found this article. It was published in 2011. And the gentleman who is the information, who provided the information from this is J. Wakefield. I have his book over here. It's called How the Sun God Reached America About 2500 BC. And in this particular article, he says, recent scientific literature has come to the conclusion that the major source of the copper that swept through the European Bronze Age after 2500 BC is unknown. Officially, they're not saying that they know where it came from. However, these studies claim that the 10 tons of copper ingots recovered from the late Bronze Age Uluburun shipwreck off the coast of Turkey was extraordinarily pure. It exceeded 99% purity. And that it was not the product of smelting from ore. The ingots were all brittle, blister copper with voids, slag bits, and oxides created when the ingots were made in multiple pourings outdoors over wood fires. Only Michigan copper is of this purity, and it is known to have been mined in enormous quantities during the Bronze Age. How much? It is estimated that 500 million pounds of copper were mined in tens of thousands of pits on Isle Royale and the Keweenaw Peninsula of Michigan by ancient miners over a period of 1,000 years. Carbon dating of wood timbers in the pits has dated the mining to start about 2450 BC and end abruptly at 1200 BC, and officially no one knows where the Michigan copper went. If all 500 million pounds of copper is sent to the Mediterranean, this factors out to be 21 copper voyages made every year for 1,200 years at 10 tons of copper per voyage. In his book entitled The Lost Empire of Atlantis, I have it over there, author Gavin Menzies makes a very strong case for the Minoans as the culture that is mining the Michigan copper from 2500 to 1200 BC. Here are some of those evidences. Number one, the tools used for mining in both European mines known to be Minoan and the Lake Superior mines are identical. Number two, the pottery and utensils found in the Lake Superior mines are identical to those used in the Minoan civilization on the island of Crete in the middle of the Mediterranean. The mines on Lake Superior are the only Bronze Age mines to contain copper with a purity exceeding 99%. Many European bronze artifacts from this time period contain copper of the same purity. Number four, the ancient mining of copper at Lake Superior ended abruptly and coincidentally with the fall of the Minoan Empire around the 1200 BC timeframe. And number five, the most compelling evidence is the unique mitochondrial DNA markers called haplogroup X. The Minoans carried this marker, and it is found today in populations on Crete, European and Middle Eastern cultures where the Minoans were known to interact, and in the Native American tribes of the Ojibwa and the Chippewa, which, by the way, Chippewa is an anglicized word for Ojibwa. It's the same tribe that they're making reference to. This is the origin area of the Ojibwa tribe. You see here, Lake Superior, they're all the way around Lake Superior. This is the Isle Royale part, which is the Canadian northern part of the Lake Superior, and then this is the Keweenaw Peninsula of Michigan. So they're all along this region where that copper would be mined and brought along to a point where it would be carried overland and put into ships. Is it possible to navigate the North Atlantic? Absolutely. You can't always rely on trade winds. Trade winds help, but you need currents too, otherwise you're dead in the water. You need a current to go with it. And so if you come out of Ireland, you can hit the Atlantic Gulf Stream, the northern part of it, and it'll take you over Iceland, which will also take you around where you can hit a cold water current that comes down around Greenland, over into the Baffin area, Newfoundland, and then down into Nova Scotia, and go right into St. Lawrence Seaway. One of the things that they talked about originally was coming in up through the Hudson Bay. You only have access maybe 2-3 months a year up there. That may have been an original find, but they certainly wouldn't be shipping year after year after year through that same passage. They'd find a different way. So it appears that not only were oceanic voyages possible, but apparently shipping of raw materials from the Americas to Europe and the Mediterranean began in the centuries just prior to the Tower of Babel and lasted for 1,000 years afterward. As a matter of fact, I don't know where they found those artifacts that tested it for that purity, but they may have been fueling part of the bronze that was part of the Babylon culture that was going on at the time. Therefore, major oceanic crossings are happening at the time that the Jaredites built their barges and crossed the ocean. Now, let's move on to Joseph. Joseph of Egypt is placed in charge of Egyptian grain and livestock production. He is second only to Pharaoh in his power to conduct business throughout Egypt. The question arises, what was the totality of his plan to ensure that Egypt would have enough supplies to endure the 7 years of famine? The roll chronology places Joseph of Egypt at about 1670 BC, and this makes Joseph a contemporary with the Egyptian pharaoh Amenemhat III, who is credited with the building of the Bar Yusuf, which is the Canal of Joseph, and the expansion of grain storage, such as the structures found at Edfu. So, contemporary with Joseph, they built a canal that's at about 150 miles up the Nile. It takes water off the Nile, and then the canal runs parallel to the Nile, but at a higher elevation. And it comes in to this region here, and it floods this region. They even have a reservoir. That would be a huge endeavor. Maybe 7 years in building, who knows, right? But that's all about expanding your production so that you have enough to spare. You're planning on having abundance. And then, about 400 miles up the Nile at Edfu, Amenemhat built structures, and these are grain storage bins that they found up there. So they're looking at storing, not just making more, producing more, but storing more. So while storage of excess grain production during the 7 years plenty may be sufficient for future need, was there a plan B in case supplies needed to be augmented? What that means is they have no way of knowing whether or not the supplies are going to be sufficient. They'll know within that first year or 18 months whether or not they're going to be able to make that last long enough. And if it's not, what's plan B? You got another 5.5 years to go through this. What's plan B? In addition, the livestock supply is a little more tricky. You can increase your herds, but that means you have to exponentially increase grain storage in order to keep the herds fed. Unless you warehouse both grain and livestock remotely and plan to have them shipped into Egypt on an as-needed basis. This requires a co-op relationship with the shipping culture. Manoah is the primary shipping culture of the day. Apparently they are shipping large amounts of copper and tin, by the way, from the British Isles. Tin coming in. Tin and copper is what makes bronze. But it's all being brought into the Mediterranean by the Minoans. Did Joseph leverage his Egyptian influence to co-op with the Minoans in creating a supply chain that would ensure Egypt would endure the 7 years of famine? Is there evidence of Minoan-Egyptian interaction at this time? There are murals found in the city of Akrotiri on the island of Santorini, which is a Minoan island, that infer Minoan shipping to a location with palms, bulrushes, felines, antelope, and people of Canaanite influence. So, this is that particular mural. What you have down here is the Mediterranean. You have a land here that have mountains on the interior. In this mountainous area, you have felines and you have antelope. Coming out of the mountainous area, you have a single river that apparently splits into 2 rivers and it creates a delta. That's exactly what happens with the Nile. The Nile comes down out of the upper regions, the Lake Victoria area as a matter of fact, and when it gets down to the Delta region, there are 2 primary rivers that come off and creates this huge delta area. In addition to that, there's more that can be inferred. Inside of the delta, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 figures. And this building is Canaanite structure buildings. And the primary figure is apparently interacting with maybe an old man. He's sitting down across the river here. This would be the land of origin for Joseph and his brothers. So it looks like the Minoans had information about Joseph and his family, and the fact that they were the primary people who were taking care of the industry in the Goshen Nile Delta area. And here's kind of give you an idea. Santorini, this is the island of Crete that the Minoans are primarily working off of. Santorini is right up here in the middle of the Aegean, and Egypt is clear down here. Those murals I showed you are in Santorini. Likewise, there are murals at Avaris, which is in Egypt, in the Nile Goshen Delta, and they display the Minoan practice of bull leaping, done in Minoan style artwork. This is that mural. And here you have the bulls, you have the people who are trying to ride the bulls, or bull leaping is what they call it. This is classical step fret Minoan artwork, along with the border down here that's the fans. And here is where that's located in Avaris. By the way, when you watch the DVD about the Exodus, Avaris is where they have found structures that apparently look like it might be inferring Joseph and his brothers. There are 12 major burial tombs there in that particular region, or in that city. So for these foreign concepts to be illustrated in palatial artwork is a solid indication of cultural relationship and common purposes. You don't include someone else's history in your capital city unless there's a warm relationship going on, unless they're contributing something to your culture. Additionally, there seems to be a symbolic relationship embedded in both Minoan and Egyptian artwork. The central deity of the Minoan culture is said to be the snake. Here's a snake goddess that was found at the Crete temple of Knossos. I assert that the Minoans did not worship the snake. They used the snake symbol to display their role and a claim to power. They are indicating that their nation, which is represented by the female, is feeding the world, which is represented by the bare breast, by means of connecting the seaways of the east and west, which is the snakes in the hands. And note that the animal that is seated on the top of the head is a feline. This implies that the feline nation of Egypt is at the head of it all. Manoah, therefore, is known as the snake nation because of their seafaring abilities. They slither upon the water and deliver goods from tributary to tributary. This concept of a snake representing Manoah and seafaring is further confirmed by the symbolic use of the Egyptian snake, Apep. In Egyptian artwork of the 8th dynasty, which is about 2100 BC, the serpent Apep is an enemy of Egypt, but by the 14th dynasty, Apep is seen as a friend to Egypt, helpful and assisting its prosperity. And that's based upon this particular mural, where we see that Apep is a friend. Notice here, there's snake imagery all over. Number one, on the top side, you have this boat shipping, and inside or on top of that boat is this doorway where you have an agent of Egypt that is dealing by authority with the agent of the snake people. And the framework of this doorway is done by a snake. It's wrapped around by a snake. Over here, you see a large snake that's going all the way up. I would love to know what the cartouches are indicating here. But here's more in the mural. Here you have a snake that originates out somewhere up in the upper left. By the way, that's where, if this is the delta of Egypt, Manoah would be up over here. But you have two primary snake systems, river systems, that are the delta. And how many loops total are on that snake? There's 12. 12 loops. And the head is touching the staff of the agent of Egypt. So indicating that the produce or whatever is coming into Egypt is coming through the tributaries that are controlled by the 12 tribes. And they are assisting in the prosperity of Egypt, represented by the staff. Interesting also, we're getting here an idea of a staff of power or authority and a snake. Where do those two images come together in the Bible? Moses comes in with a wooden staff and he throws it on the floor and it turns into a snake, and then he pulls it back up. It meant something to them on a much deeper level than what we understand, what we comprehend. But by the 20th dynasty, Apep is illustrated as a power that had to be destroyed. This seems to coincide with Egypt's isolation of Byblos and Sidon. So if this particular fruited tree represents the Nile coming down or coming up, and then this is the delta, then the snake is blocking access. The feline authority of Egypt is saying, I've had enough of this. He takes his power paw, puts his right paw on the head of the snake, and with his left, he's taking a knife and cutting off the head of the snake. And in essence, that's what Egypt did when they cut off Sidon and Byblos from Phoenician or Minoan access. So during the 12th dynasty, when Joseph is in power, the serpent Apep is friendly to Egypt. It appears that Joseph had engendered good relations with Manoah and was utilizing their sea power to enhance Egypt's goal of surviving the 7 years of lean. So what methodology would Joseph employ for surviving those 7 years? Pharaoh's dream indicated both grains and livestock would be affected. How does one go about increasing both of those for a 7-year period? The approach would have to be twofold. First, find ways to increase production, like the Canal of Joseph, and use the 7 years of plenty to build storage facilities, like at Edfu, for excess crops, while at the same time establishing trade connections to increase imports and buy while there is abundance and grain supplies are cheap. Doesn't matter what area you live in, supply and demand is always the law of financial world. Right, Frank?
Right on.
Then second, during the 7 years of lean, you utilize the established trade connections to continue imports of grain and livestock so that the drain on the Egyptian surplus is slowed and they are able to last the entire 7 years. This means that the augmented supply must be from outside the region. Apparently, the famine would be on a massive scale. The fact that Joseph's family journeyed from Canaan to Egypt because of the famine indicates that the event was much larger than just a local phenomenon. It was more than just the Nile going dry or whatever. It was on a larger scale. If the Minoans are already sailing the North Atlantic, such as indicated by the Michigan copper and British tin being brought into the Mediterranean, then certainly those same trade routes could be utilized for grain and livestock commodities. Because the trade routes are located on the North Atlantic, there are many proprietary locations that can be utilized. And believe me, proprietary is key. Manoah had their power because they were the only ones who knew where to get it and how to get there. They're not going to want to use a land that somebody else is using. They're going to want to find one that they have complete control over, so they have proprietary control. The northern portion of the Iberian Peninsula, areas along the English Channel, the British Isles, and even the regions around Nova Scotia and St. Lawrence Seaway are all possibilities. These locations could easily provide additional grains and continual supplies of livestock that we would deliver to Egypt in 30 to 45 days. The problem here is that growing seasons are limited, so even in these regions, grains would need to either be stored or delivered as soon as it is harvested. However, the delivery of livestock could be conducted throughout the entire year as a continual replenishment. Many have suggested that the 7 years of lean was something local to Egypt or regional to the Near East, such as volcanic eruption, but recent research has revealed that the event that caused the 7 years of lean was probably on a much larger scale than anyone anticipated. Babylonian star charts record an event where the planet Venus was blocked from view from May through October of 1627 BC. Many have speculated that this was the cataclysmic explosion of Santorini in the Aegean Sea, which would then have affected all the cultures in the Near East. But a 2019 study conducted in the ice fields of Greenland did not find evidence of anything from Santorini. They did find something huge that seems to validate the Babylonian star charts of 1627 BC. It was a cataclysmic explosion at Mount Aniakchak in the Aleutian Island chain of Alaska. The eruption formed a caldera nearly 7 miles wide, and significant sediments of it were found in the Greenland ice fields. This correlates with frozen tree rings found in Ireland and other locations of the northern hemisphere, like into Russia, Ukraine. So this is a Google Earth photograph of Alaska, and out here on this archipelago is Mount Aniakchak. This is a close-up view. It shows you the size of the caldera. When it was done with its eruptions, eventually that mountaintop fell in and created a caldera that's 7 miles wide. The Irish oak tree ice rings and the subsequent slow growth due to cold weather conditions indicate the magnitude of the Aniakchak eruption, which can easily then translate to a global cooling of the northern hemisphere due to atmospheric blanketing. This means that Egypt's original plan to utilize North Atlantic sources for grain and livestock supplementation is off the table, and a quick alternative plan must be instituted. A 2018 publication entitled In the Shadows by Manalise Koutlis, and I have a copy of that book over here, demonstrates that ancient mariners not only knew how to navigate the North Atlantic from Europe to the St. Lawrence Seaway, they also knew of the fiery waters in the Gulf of America and the currents that flowed from there into the Atlantic Gulf Stream. And so what he talks about here is, and he talks about the Minoans. He says that he believes that it didn't take too long, and they quickly discovered that they only had to port that copper from either the Lake Superior area or Lake Michigan area about 15 miles before it hit a tributary of the Mississippi River, either on the Wisconsin River or the Illinois River. And all of that could be brought as raw material while it was allowed, while the conditions were well enough for them to be able to mine it, put it quickly on barges, bring it down the Mississippi River, and they could then process it there into the ingots. And you could have access to this region year-round. So this is the Florida current that comes up from the Yucatan towards the New Orleans area, around the Florida Peninsula, and then it eventually comes up and meets with the Atlantic Gulf Stream and goes right over to the northern part of the European area. Because it is known that a major eruption of Mount Aniakchak coincides with the 1627 events in the Mediterranean where the view of the night stars are blanketed, We can assume that the ash fallout and atmospheric blanket from this event affected most of the regions of the north. And the reason I say this is, all of us know, we've all experienced that terrible northern jet stream that comes out of Canada and swings way down into the southern part of the States. That same jet stream system in the upper atmosphere is going to take that ash and spread it across and create a very large blanketed area that's going to impact all the northern hemisphere. So understanding the epic scope of the disaster, the Minoans had to find a secondary source that was not affected by the atmospheric blanket caused by the ash cloud. The Olmec culture on the western shores of the Gulf of America would be an ideal secondary location. Here they find a year-round growing season with people already present to plant, cultivate, and harvest the crops and tend to the livestock. The Olmec were poised to benefit from this global disaster. And I think by this time, our Minoan friends had already found this shipping or sailing circuit. Coming out of the Mediterranean, they'd go along the North African coast until they came to the Canaries. And from the Canaries, they'd pick up this mid-Atlantic trade wind current that would bring them over into the Caribbean area, pick up whatever they needed, drop off whatever they needed, and then, as we talked about earlier, come back across, hit the Azores, and then back into the Mediterranean. We've already drawn a parallel between the Olmec culture of Mesoamerica and the Book of Mormon Jaredites. Are there clues in the Jaredite record that contact was made with the seafaring group at about the time that Joseph was in Egypt? Well, remember that I told you that Joseph of Egypt appears to be contemporary with Emer? Emer is the first time we get a list of the things that they are involved in with their trade. It is Joseph's Jaredite king contemporary named Emer who provides us with a detailed list of their wealth. This is 4th chapter of Ether. And it came to pass, Emer did reign in his stead, and did fill the steps of his father. And the Lord began again to take the curse from off the land. And the house of Emer did prosper exceedingly under his reign. And in the space of 62 years, they had become exceeding strong, insomuch that they became exceeding rich, having all manner of fruit and grain, and silks, and fine linen, gold, silver, and precious things, and also all manner of cattle, of oxen, cows, sheep, swine, goats, and also many other kinds of animals which were useful for the food of man. And they also had horses and asses, and there were elephants, and curulams, and kumams, all of which were useful unto man, and more especially the elephants and curulams and kumams. And thus the Lord did pour out his blessing upon this land, which was choice above all other lands. And he commanded that whoso should possess the land should possess it unto the Lord, or they should be destroyed when they are ripened in iniquity. For upon such, saith the Lord, I will pour out the fullness of my wrath. And Emer did execute judgment in righteousness all his days. And he begat many sons and daughters, and he begat Coriantum, and he anointed Coriantum to reign in his stead. And after he anointed him to reign in his stead, he lived 4 years, and he saw peace in the land. Yea, and he even saw the Son of Righteousness, and did rejoice and glory in his day, and he died in peace. This list is not for items used as everyday or staple foods. This is a list of commodities used in trade, or for the support of industry to promote trade. And it says that they became exceeding rich. Specifically, several of the items on Emer's list are what Pharaoh saw glittering in his dream. Grains and livestock, having all manner of fruit and grain. That's the first 2 things he's listing there. Now he lists silks and fine linen, gold and silver. I think that's what they were getting as payment for the grains and the livestock that they were sending over. They were receiving payment in gold and silver, in silks and fine linens. And also all manner of cattle, and oxen, cows, sheep, swine, goats, many other kinds of animals which are useful for the food of man. And, question, did a grateful Joseph provide the horses and asses, elephants, kumams, and kurlams to assist in the industry to continue supplying Egypt with its food necessities? And I'm wondering if the kumams and kurlams aren't the two species of camels, the single hump and the two hump camel, which would be beasts of burden. And that's what he said are specifically very helpful, is the elephants to clear the land. And then the camels, the two species of camels, to actually help in being able to take large amounts of packing to wherever they needed to go. The Minoan trade connection may explain why the Olmec culture was concentrated along the lowland Gulf shores. The following is a map of the Olmec trading regions in Mesoamerica. And you can see here that the primary areas are right here at what they call the cradle of the Olmec trade area. And all along this coastal region on the Pacific area, but they know that that's coming up along this way. This whole region and this whole region, sugarcane, pineapple, mangoes, papaya, your citrus, such as your lemons and limes, and so on. All of that is coming up and probably coming out of these ports up in this area. In addition, Diana Worth's Parallels, which is right over here, publication entitled Parallels, Mesoamerican and Ancient Middle Eastern Traditions, is a collection of artifactual evidence that demonstrates Egyptian and other Middle Eastern influences in Olmec artwork and cultural practices that cannot be explained except through cultural diffusion. There's too much overlay or overlap in their imagery, their symbolism, and their concept of cosmology, basically, how they see the world and view the world, and how things originated. It appears that there is growing evidence that the ancient Mesoamerican culture of the Olmec were in contact with seafaring traders who had connections with Joseph and ancient Egypt. We also find there are clues in the blessing Israel conferred upon his son Joseph that infer this Mesoamerican connection. You're familiar with Joseph's blessing, correct? Joseph is a fruitful bough, even a fruitful bough by a well, whose branches run over the wall. The archers had sorely grieved him and shot at him and hated him, but his bow abode in strength, and the arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob. From thence is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. Even by the God of thy father, who shall help thee, and by the Almighty, who shall bless thee with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lieth under, blessings of the breasts and of the womb. The blessings of thy father have prevailed above the blessings of my progenitors, unto the utmost bounds of the everlasting hills. They shall be on the head of Joseph, and on the crown of the head of him that was separate from his brother. We go into it and look at this with the information we just went over. Joseph is a fruitful bough, indicating surplus, even a fruitful bough by a well, the Mediterranean Sea being the well, whose branches, the Minoan seafarers, run over the wall, which is the Atlantic Ocean. The blessings of thy father prevailed above the blessings of my progenitors unto the utmost bound of the everlasting hills. The everlasting hills being a reference to the Americas, because that was the land of their original father Adam. They shall be on the head of Joseph and on the crown of the head of him who is separate from his brethren. These aspects of Israel's blessing upon Joseph, while true in the latter days, are also true for his time. Joseph is a fruitful bough, infers he had already accomplished the surplus of Egypt, which is the blessings of the womb and breasts, gathered from the Americas, which are the everlasting hills, from across the oceans, which are the blessings of the deep. Then factor in the blessings of Ephraim and Manasseh. And as you know, Jacob is getting ready to put his hand on his grandsons, and he puts his right hand on Ephraim. And Ephraim's not the oldest, Manasseh's the oldest. Joseph's trying to correct him and say, no, this one's the younger. And Jacob says, and his father refused and said, I know it, my son, I know it. He, Manasseh, also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. But truly his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his seed shall become a multitude of nations. And he blessed them that day, saying, In thee shall Israel bless, saying, God make thee as Ephraim and Manasseh. And he set Ephraim before Manasseh. Biblical researchers claim that the nation of Britain is Ephraim, and that the nation of the United States is Manasseh. Ephraim came first and birthed many nations. They reigned over the seas. While the United States is the nation of 13, the United States was formed from 13 British colonies, just as Manasseh is the 13th member of the tribe of Israel. Both of these lands are geographically on the sea routes over which Joseph dispatched the Manoahs to provide Egypt with their needed provisions. And I said that because why did God make the covenant with Joseph and say, this is your land? This is going to be the land of your inheritance. Something took place that solidified that blessing. This latter-day relationship of nations is telling us that we are living in the land of Joseph and his inheritance, a land that was promised to Joseph. Ether apparently had knowledge of this covenant relationship. Perhaps Ether's understanding of Joseph's legacy was not just by inspiration of the Spirit, but also through his knowledge of ancient American history going back to the 17th century BC, when the Minoans first initiated trade on behalf of Joseph of Egypt. In fact, I ask these questions. Did Joseph visit the Jaredite people? Did Joseph share the gospel with Emer and proclaim a blessing similar to what Ether claimed to have knowledge about concerning the land of the New Jerusalem? You know, and the Lord did pour out his blessings upon this land, which is choice above all other lands, and he commanded that whoso should possess it unto the Lord, or they should be destroyed when they were ripened with iniquity. And I want to go down to the very end here. And after he had anointed Coriantum, talking about Emer, to reign in his stead, he lived 4 years, and he saw peace in the land. Yea, he even saw the Son of Righteousness, and did rejoice and glory in his day, and he died in peace. So my question is the Son of Righteousness in this passage a cryptic reference to Joseph of Egypt? Here's my reasoning. Was Joseph acting as Melchizedek had for his great-grandfather Abraham? Did Joseph provide a patriarchal blessing on a land and a people that would be blessed for millennia to come? Melchizedek means king of righteousness. Melchizedek means king of righteousness. So if Joseph is acting as Melchizedek had acted, is Joseph a son of righteousness in this particular context? In presentations to follow, we will demonstrate how the initial trade contact morphs and develops through the centuries, and we will use the scant clues provided in the Book of Mormon record that hint to these ancient seafaring connections. But that concludes what I found in this initial. Yes?
Just something to back up what you're saying. I have visited the peninsula of Michigan that you referred to, and I can tell you that as of today, you can walk in and pick up solid chunks of copper. It doesn't have to be smelted. You can just, it's pure copper, and pick it up out of the ground. And they have, in the visitor center, you can do that. I've got a chunk of copper at home. And they also have pictures in caves where they go in, and in the caves they've got these big boulders made out of solid copper.
I know someone who grew up in the Keweenaw Peninsula. And he said their high school history class was that there were ancient people who came here, probably the Minoans, and who mined this. So locally, they have that belief. They're sure that that's where that came from. Any other questions? All right. Sorry it took so long.
Thank you.
But it worked.